The Denver Broncos end the preseason on a high note, 3-0, undefeated. How much merit does it have in the regular season? Not too much, but there is a lot that we're going to take away. We saw some starters play. We saw Melvin Gordon. We saw Courtland Sutton, Von Miller. What was their impact like in preseason action against the LA Rams? Sayre, Bedinger, myself, we break it down on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Broncos country, welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day. This is your Locked on Broncos post-game report. Preseason game number 3 against the LA Rams is over as the Denver Broncos find themselves victorious 17-12. I'm Cody, Roark, host of the show, joined alongside by Sayre Bedinger. We're going to break down all the action with Sayre. Look, preseason action, the Broncos go undefeated. Not going to read too much into that because there's still evidently a lot of areas that this team can improve on heading into the regular season. But for the most part, what were your thoughts?
You know, definitely great to have the preseason in the books. A little bittersweet, Cody. You know me. I like to watch all these guys. Top to the bottom of the roster. I love watching them. So it's a little bittersweet, but at the same time, it's going to be good to finally have the opportunity to see what this team can do when everything really matters. You know, it was a good glimpse tonight, I would say. Just given there's a little bit of pressure, the first team out there kind of all together for the very first time. So on both sides of the ball, really. So I'm excited, man. It was a good game to finish things off. Some good vibes, ending on good vibes, and I think we're ready. I think we're ready for the regular season.
Yeah, I know I'm ready for the regular season. I know the Broncos players are ready as well. And look, there's some things that they have to work on. And we'll break that down in today's post-game report. The Broncos finished victorious 17-12 against the Los Angeles Rams here. But, you know, Sayre, let's open up with really the biggest story of preseason action, game number 3. We got to see Courtland Sutton. We got to see Von Miller. We got to see Melvin Gordon and Tim Patrick, players who have yet to play down in the preseason. They made their return tonight, and obviously I think they look good. Melvin Gordon looked great, by the way, in terms of being able to run. And there was I get it was the Rams' second-string defense, but they played very aggressive coming into every gap and trying to pinch the edge. And Melvin Gordon, 5 carries, he had over 20 yards rushing. I mean, it was nice and limited action.
Yeah, really, really great to see Melvin Gordon out there running hard. I think that the statistics don't really necessarily tell the story. I think one of those runs, one of those 5 carries was probably like a 3 or 4 yard run where he was hit twice in behind the line of scrimmage. So definitely some really good stuff from Melvin Gordon in terms of just looking really fresh, looking motivated. You know, we know that he's been kind of open about the fact that he didn't love the fact that the fans absolutely adore Philip Lindsay, and you know he was kind of like shortchanged as a result of that. And so I think he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder, you know, and he's excited to finally play that road home game against the Chargers. So I think that Melvin is going to have a good season, and he looks ready to go. And it was great to see all those injured players from last season, like we said, kind of like the reunion episode of your favorite show, all those guys back out there on the field at the same time. And I think, Cody, and maybe you can attest to this as well. My thought is that it looked like the offense was really trying to scheme things early on, specifically for those guys that had been hurt, and really kind of trying to force feed some touches their way, whether it was Melvin Gordon, Courtland Sutton, Albert Okwuegbunam, Tim Patrick, et cetera, et cetera. So it was good to see them all back for sure.
Yeah, it was. And go back to that note there, we'll touch on Teddy Bridgewater's first 2 series. A little bit of a rough start for Teddy Bridgewater, specifically after being named the starter. I mean, we were watching the first 2 drives happen, and in my head, I'm just thinking, I'm like, okay, here comes the crap storm that we're going to get on Twitter from just, the opposing sides. We see just the divide in the fan base. Obviously touching on Melvin Gordon, I think he summarized it best. Look, Melvin was viewed and painted out to be a bad guy because he was coming in and Philip Lindsay wasn't going to get the touches that he normally got as a Denver Bronco. And so I think it was kind of unfair to Melvin Gordon, that perspective that was painted. But going to that, you mentioned Courtland Sutton. There was a time where Teddy Bridgewater tried to get him involved early on a slant. It was a little bit behind him. And look, so you have to settle down a little bit. It's going to take time to get into rhythm. And sometimes quarterbacks can get off to a slow start and find a little bit of way to heat up. Sometimes they're going to get off to a little bit of a hot start and then fizzle out there. So I wouldn't read too much into it, but, I'd say the first 2 drives for Teddy were rough, but he finished the game 5 for 5 down the stretch with a touchdown pass to Courtland Sutton. I tell you what, I'm so happy for Courtland. And there was one play, too, where he shook a defender off of just coverage there. And he planted with that left foot, the ACL that he had torn, planted with it and just completely burnt the guy. Courtland looked good out there. He moved well. I'd say it's safe to say he's probably going to be 100% for the Giants.
And that's really great to see. Courtland Sutton, I don't think it's just pump and fluff or hyperbole or whatever you want to say that Courtland Sutton is the best player on the Denver Broncos when healthy. And that's with all due respect to Von Miller, who has been the best player on the team for the better part of the last decade.
Yes.
And he did look good. So I think it speaks volumes. Courtland Sutton is an impact player at one of the most important positions in the game. He's in a contract year. He's obviously become a key leader on this Denver Broncos team. And so he is so important. I mean, even losing Von Miller last year, I don't know that was the end of the world for the Denver Broncos. Losing Courtland Sutton, that was the end of the world. That was the end of the line. And we saw that kind of come out and come into play all throughout the season. His presence desperately missed. And I think getting to see him out there, like you said, shaking that defender. Look, these guys are second, third string guys. It doesn't matter. Those guys are playing for roster spots. They're playing with house money. They're playing for places in the rotation. They want to go out there and make the play against Courtland Sutton. They want to go out there and make the play against Jerry Jeudy, because if they put that on tape, they're going to get to play, or they're going to eventually get paid. You never know how anybody's story in the NFL gets started. So I don't really care that they're second and third string guys. The fact that Courtland was leaving one of them in the dust, I think that's exactly what we wanted to see in this game.
Absolutely. Great confidence builder, too. I know coming off of ACL, there's the mental journey. And we saw the same thing with Albert Okwuegbunam. I mean, the first catch that he caught, somebody went low on him, and I was thinking, okay, this is where the mental part, okay, this is the first hit that he's going to take. And then he tries to hurdle a guy, but he puts that knee in somebody's face. So you know what? Albert O looks good. Eric Saubert looks great as well. The Broncos tight end unit. We'll talk about one player coming up here in a little bit, but obviously a little bit of a recap there. We'll touch on some of the other performances coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the post-game sponsor. It's good friends over there at Built Bar. Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market today. They have 9 amazing, delicious flavors, including the occasional limited time flavor, and you can choose your own personal favorite. Mine is peanut butter brownie, salted caramel. Sayre has his own preferences that he is now has. Sayre, what is your favorite flavor that you've had so far?
Man, the mint and chocolate combination is where I'm at, Cody. I don't know. Maybe it's just this time of year, like we got pumpkin spice rolling in. Ultimately, the mint chocolate's going to roll in. So maybe it's just, the season for me. But mint chocolate's where I'm at right now.
I love it. Amazing flavors, and it's the best tasting protein bar on the market. It's also the healthiest protein bar, 17 grams of protein, only 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar. And I want you and your families to get your hands on a box of Built Bar today by going to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15. It's going to get you 15% off your next order. Once again, promo code LOCKED15 is going to get you 15% off your next order at Built.com. All right, sir, continue our conversation here. Locked On Broncos post-game report. The Broncos victorious in the preseason finale at Empire Field at Mile High against the Los Angeles Rams. Talking about some of the performances, it was great to see Von, Courtland, Melvin Gordon, Tim Patrick back. Teddy Bridgewater shaking off a little bit of a rough start there. There's so many other players we can touch on here, but I do want to give some thoughts because Twitter, as always, it's the machine that always freaks out. And look, the Broncos' first-team defense, you mentioned it earlier on here in the show, this was really the first time, maybe outside of a couple of series they played against Seattle, where the full unit, the full-on starting unit, played. And they gave up some plays. And there was a couple times where Los Angeles moved the ball downfield. Bryce Perkins, we talked about him in the pregame show. Hey, make sure that you do whatever you can to secure the bag. And look, I think he's a great athlete. He made a good stake, but obviously he's not going to be on the Rams roster here. For the most part, the Broncos first-team defense giving up some yards there. I wanted to point out, in my opinion, I'm not too worried about it, Sayre, because when you look at it, they were sending really a 4-man rush. I mean, they're sending Vaughn, they're sending Bradley Chubb, they're sending Shelby Harris, Draymond Jones, Mike Purcell at times in the middle. And it's just a straight-on rush upfield, sometimes a 5-man pressure. But there's no twist packages. There's none of those stunts, none of those inside linebackers until after the fact that the Rams were really kind of gashing the Broncos. Vic Fangio said, okay, enough is enough. We're sending the house. They sent a double linebacker blitz, and Josie Jewell comes home for a sack. Are you concerned a little bit about the Broncos first team D? I'm personally not, but I'm already seeing it on Facebook and Twitter from Broncos fans that they are.
Yeah, wow, that doesn't surprise me. You're seeing it on Facebook. So Facebook Broncos fans, you gotta be better. You gotta be better, everyone. Come on. No, I'm not worried whatsoever. I think, like you said, very basic stuff. And I was going to say the exact same thing as you did. There came a point where Vic Fangio kind of just like, he threw his little whatever he was, whether it was in his head or whether he was holding a sheet of like, here's what we need to do in this game. He just threw it to the side and was like, screw that. We're blitzing and we're blitzing our linebackers at this guy because I'm tired of watching the defense stay out on the field. Ideally, like we talked about in the pregame show, I think it would have been great to see Von Miller come out, get a sack on third down, and the first team defense just struts off the field in celebration. But that obviously didn't happen. So I think there's definitely something to be said for the fact of, this guy was kind of breaking out of the pocket, making some plays with his legs. Maybe looked like it was a little bit sluggish out there from the secondary guys and things like that. But, we also saw Kareem Jackson come up, make some really nice hits in run support. We saw Von Miller make some nice tackles at and behind around the line of scrimmage. You saw Bradley Chubb get a really good burst off the line as well on one of his pass rush reps. And this is just all stuff off the top of my head as we just finished watching the game. So yeah. This kind of stuff, we'll go back and we'll look at the film. Draymond Jones had a TFL, so obviously not all bad, right? Definitely a lot of good to take away. Don't like to see the other team scoring points when it's not, Matt Stafford and the number one receivers and tight ends out there and things like that. But at the same time, still some good stuff put on tape by the defense, getting their feet wet and just getting tuned up for Daniel Jones and the Giants offense.
Well, now let's talk about the Broncos' second-string offensive unit. We know the offensive line last week, they had a little bit of a sluggish performance. They got off to a little bit of a slow start here. There was a play where Cam Fleming got beat off the right edge, but Drew Lock also held on to the ball a little too long. It led to a strip sack. And I think that it's a great learning experience here for Drew. Like, the one thing I would say, like, you look at it from the pros and cons side. The good thing, Drew stood in the pocket, which he was always hesitant to because he was always looking to move or to scramble last year. So there was an improvement there in terms of him actually standing in the pocket. The only negative side of that, you hold on to it too long, and obviously your right tackle gets beat. I think that Cam Fleming kind of played his way off of an active roster spot, but he could be that practice squad veteran guy that you were talking about. And we'll give a little bit of our final roster projection, maybe who won a spot on the roster coming up a little bit later on here in the show. But, for the most part, I think Drew did a really good job responding. There was a pass down the left sideline to Tyree Cleveland. He just missed it by about 1.5 yards, but taking a shot downfield, standing in the pocket. Some good runs by Demarie Crockett because they started off on their own 1 yard line at one point. But a nice drive there, obviously capping it off. Austin Fort catching a touchdown pass. Great throw by Drew into tight coverage, really a good window where it was perfect. It wasn't like he was contested coverage, but he had a linebacker and a safety right there. He fit the window perfectly. Fort catches it, touchdown. Great story for Austin Fort, knowing the adversity he's faced in the last couple of years.
Really great story. Really, really cool. Obviously, seeing him come back from the knee injury last offseason and only to have another injury pop up was really a shame, just because I feel like there's been opportunity for him to crack the roster. There's been opportunity for a guy like him to show up and show out. And Vic Fangio talked about him at a recent press conference and just said there's certainly nobody on the team that wants to be on the team more than Austin Fort at this point. The guy's out there. I was watching him after the touchdown catch. You see him in the huddle right before the kickoff, and he's still trying to even catch his breath from the moment that just happened, the celebration that just happened, getting ready to go down on kickoff coverage. So really shout out to him for just that's hard work, man. That's tough. That's brutal. Coming back from 2 major injuries. That's really admirable for him. And to get a touchdown in this last preseason game, I love to see that. And I hope we get a chance to see him again. But you're spot on with the second team offense, Cody. It's Drew Lock's opportunity to kind of, show the coaching staff what they missed out on. And I think that this whole preseason, we've really seen exactly, both sides of the Drew Lock coin, haven't we? We've seen, like Vic Fangio and Pat Shurmur talked about, we've seen the great improvements. We saw him complete just about 68% of his passes. We saw him throw 3 touchdowns. We've seen him hit the 80-yard bomb. What else have we also seen? 3 fumbles. And that's exactly what the coaching staff knows that they can't afford. And the strip sack, unfortunately, is really just an example of kind of at this point what sets Teddy Bridgewater, in my opinion, apart from Drew Lock, if you're thinking of it from the coaching staff perspective, those 3 fumbles from Drew Lock in the preseason simply cannot happen. And you'll notice Teddy Bridgewater didn't take a single sack, if memory serves me correctly. So,
Yeah.
and that was over the course of all 3 games. So 0 sacks taken from Teddy Bridgewater. A couple of inaccurate throws in tonight's game, or in the game on Saturday evening against the Rams. But at the same time, he didn't have 3 fumbles like Drew Lock had. He didn't have the trip over the offensive lineman like Drew Lock had. So it's just those tough things, man, that's what sets it apart. Those are the things that come up in game situations that you just can't afford.
Yeah, no, you're spot on about that too. And so it's good. Like I said, it's a great learning process here for Drew, and he can continue to learn from Teddy. Being able to stand in the pocket, understanding, because we've seen Teddy at times, he stands in the pocket, pressure's coming around him, but he's got like a shoulder dip, and he stands up and he still throws it and tries to deliver there. And I think for Teddy, when he started off the game, just a couple of his throws were, I think, were a little high. He had a high pass to a tight end, obviously a pass breakup to Albert Okwuegbunam. Then he had a high pass a little bit to Melvin Gordon where he caught it, came down and kind of landed on his knee, and so he's down by initial contact with the turf. But outside of that, room to improve, the safer option, I would say. But now I expect to see some more testing downfield. I don't think the Broncos are going to come out in this preseason game and just air it out. And I think we saw a little bit about what their base is going to be, but we haven't seen what the Broncos fully plan to unleash. Obviously, no Javonte Williams in this game, a lot of Demaria Crockett, but we're going to talk about coming up here in a little bit. Some of the concerns on the special team side of the ball being more validity this week in comparison to last week, and why we are a little skeptical right now heading into the regular season, plus any players that maybe want a roster spot. But before we do that, let me tell you about betonline.ag, the other sponsor of today's postgame report here, Locked On Broncos. And BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. It is that time of the year again, and BetOnline has you covered for all the pro football needs and college football needs that you have, specifically in one place. That is BetOnline. And as always, BetOnline is the number one spot for all of the action this upcoming season. You get all the updated odds, props, and contest information, including the NFL Mega Contest, where it's $500,000, and the world's largest $200,000 NFL Survivor Contest, now available. BetOnline.ag. From football, basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait and take advantage of the great offers available for the 2021 NFL season, all at BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. All right, Sayre, as we jump to the fourth quarter action of today's episode, Locked On Broncos, just a reminder, all the fans out there in Broncos country, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you get daily Broncos news content and coverage. Not to mention, this podcast is also available free and everywhere on your favorite audio podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or the Odyssey app. Sayre and I, we got you covered 5 days a week, sometimes 6-7 days a week. It depends on the schedule for the Broncos, but we have you covered all year long. Broncos news content and coverage. Wanted to bring up real quick this special teams thing. We saw the Broncos in this game. No issues, no concerns with Brandon McManus. I mean, he is who he is, and he's just nailing him from 50 yards. Death taxes and Brandon McManus from 50 plus. Those are guarantees in life, Sayre, but no guarantees on the kick coverage unit that had several instances of a 30 plus, 40 plus yard return. That was a big concern for me, and it reared its head here. Last week I said, hey, I'm not concerned because this was the first time that the Broncos have had an opportunity to force a kick coverage. And now you see it in this game where they give up multiple big yard returns. I am concerned about it.
Yeah, it's tough, man. It's tough. And not only the kick coverage, but 12 men out there for the field goal team. It's not looking good for Tom McMahon's group right now, in all honesty. And I think that to see the Rams punter come out there, it's their backup punter too, if I'm not mistaken on that one. Yes. Their backup punter's just coming out there and just dropping bombs all over the field, kicking it 70 yards out of bounds inside the 5. Like, where's this guy come from, and how are they going to cut him? Like, that's a weapon.
Do you think that they do? Do you think that they cut him?
If they do, I would be putting in a claim on that. And if they don't, I might even be calling about a trade. I'm not even joking. Like
Royce
Sam
Martin,
hey, I'd be down for that. And I think that there's going to be some running backs that come available. You never know. So to me, Cody, and I was just trying to kind of pay attention specifically to some different details of like, why is this happening? And I don't know, is it Sam Martin out kicking the coverage? You don't hear that phrase very often unless you're talking about a guy who's got a girlfriend that's way hotter than he is. So, I mean,
That's
I
me
don't
and my
really,
wife.
dude, me too. I'm there. So I just think that it's one of those things, like, you don't really see it a lot, like in NFL games, like, man, that punter is just consistently out kicking the coverage. But like, is Sam Martin out kicking the coverage? I don't know. Obviously, kickoffs are a different beast, but if Sam Martin is trying to kick it as far as he possibly can without getting it as, I'm not a punter. I can't do that stuff. But I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and say, like, well, you got to kick it far and high, just like the Rams guy, But I think that it is concerning, Cody. Like, you can't be having game altering plays on special teams when, your margin for error is really not that great. Like, the Broncos offense has to go out there and prove, okay, yeah, we can score 24, 27 points on a given week. They can't just assume that that's going to happen. The defense needs a long field. Like, the Broncos defense, even, with the personnel that they have, they're so much more effective if you give them a long field to work with, just like most any defense. That's Captain Obvious there. But I mean, specifically with their tremendous pass rushers, like, you want the teams playing deep. So you've got to get this figured out. I don't know if it happens on waivers. I don't know if it happens in free agency. I'm interested to see what George Payton and Vic Fangio decide to do, because it has become a pretty substantial problem.
Yeah, and you have to wonder. I mean, I don't know if the Broncos make any changes now, but look, if special teams continues to be an issue for this team, I mean, you may see a change happen during the regular season. How early could that happen? I'm not quite sure. You have to have a really good plan in place, which I wonder if George Payton has any contingencies with that. But I will throw it to this. We'll focus on special teams. The Broncos country, let us know how concerned you are about the Broncos special teams play. There's still a couple of standouts. Savion Smith saved a touchdown, in my opinion, with a great stick-'em tackle. But let's talk about some of these other players to close out today's episode of the show. Looking at that third and final preseason game, we know roster cuts are coming, probably as soon as Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. In your opinion, was there anybody that maybe stood out to you that you feel like maybe won a roster spot with their performance against the Rams?
To me, Cody, it's Jamar Johnson. I just feel like, since we talked about Mike Kliss's 53-man roster projection and Jamar being left off of that, you can't help but wonder if that was simply just a little bit of an oversight based on the way Jamar has played in these last two games. Yeah. I know that he was kind of labeled as behind going into training camp and landing on the COVID list early. But man, he's been all over the field. He really has, and he made a big pass breakup just at the end of this Rams game. He had a big pass breakup in the end zone. He's been all over the field in terms of just coming up and run support and doing what he can to prove, that tackling is not a problem for him, which it was for both him and Caden Stearns in college, and hasn't really been so far in the preseason. I think they've done a good job of really emphasizing it for those guys. So to me, Jamar Johnson, and as poor as special teams was, Jamar was pretty routinely one of the first guys down the field as well. Yep. So I noticed 41 was always the first one to the punt returner if he was out on the field. So
and he's the personal protector too. He's protecting on the up man for Sam Martin.
Yeah, exactly. So he's my guy. So I'm interested to hear what your guy is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it too. I'm looking at the secondary, right? And so I'm starting to factor in a couple of things here, Sayre. I think Jamar Johnson, I don't think that the Broncos are going to waive him necessarily. I think maybe he's probably going to be that fifth safety on the roster. I think he's a good chance to be a lock there because he has developmental traits that the team obviously likes. And I think he had a great 2 preseason games here against Seattle and obviously against the Rams. I'm going to stick on the defensive side of the ball. Part of me was wondering between Savion Smith and Nate Hairston. There's times I saw them make a few plays here, and there was also a play, too, where Savion Smith came up and just jarred a guy. We talked about the kickoff, but also in the defense. He flies around. And then you see guys like Kerry Vincent Jr. leaving the game, banged up in the final minute. Not sure if that's going to bode well for his chances. I think that maybe Savion Smith could have made a claim for a roster spot, but I also want to maybe give a little bit of a shout-out to Marquise Spencer. He got a sack. It didn't count because of a holding call on Mac McCain, but he looked pretty good there. McTelvin Agim got a sack there. Obviously his roster spot's not in jeopardy, but I think that maybe Trinity Benson probably locked up his roster spot in this game. think Kendall Hinton made a little bit of a claim there, but I think that he'll probably be waived and be claimed off of waivers. Now, Sayre, I don't necessarily know how things are going to go. I mean, we obviously have our projections. Mike Kliss has his projections, but I think that for the most part, I can see a player like Nate Hairston probably sticking on. If the Broncos waive Savion Smith, I think he's going to be back on the practice squad quicker than a hiccup. I know we've heard Vic Fangio use that before. But outside of that, are you surprised at maybe anything here, considering the depth? Because I saw during the game you put out a tweet really kind of putting together who you feel like the final roster could be based on this game. And I felt like it was pretty spot on.
Yeah, I think that this game definitely has some weight in things. I think that cornerback position, you're going to see at least one spot open up for somebody. So I think initially you keep 11 defensive backs. That's going to include Michael Ojemudia, who will probably land on the short-term injured reserve. So you're keeping essentially, I don't know if they'll keep 7 corners right away and compromise elsewhere, or if they'll keep 6 and then land Ojemudia on IR and pick somebody else. I think with special teams being as big of a concern as it's been, and there's kind of like there's a lack of separation. We're still talking about, Savion Smith, Nate Hairston, Kerry Vincent Jr., and it's not necessarily like, man, these guys are all just playing great. So I think that you maybe look to the outside where guys are getting cut, or maybe you look to trades. I don't know. I'm still on the CJ Henderson vibe, man. I would love to see that happen. So I know that's not what a lot of people in Broncos country are really thinking about right now, is the cornerback position. But man, that could be a spot where you could upgrade at special teams as well. And then I think that definitely I was a little disappointed to see off the edge. I wanted to see a little bit more from Tuska. I wanted to see a little bit more from Andre Mintz. I think that both of those guys are strong practice squad candidates with those 4 edge spots locked in, and as well as the off-ball linebacker position. I think you're pretty well set there with Johnson, Jewell, Browning, and then obviously Justin Sternad. So you've got to find these special teams guys elsewhere. Is it Seth Williams? Is he a guy that you like over Tyree Cleveland? Is Saubert going to be the new Andrew Beck, or do you keep both Saubert and Andrew Beck? Royce? I think they do too. Is Royce Freeman good enough at special teams to take 4 running backs into the regular season when you have Demarie Crockett, who could probably play a similar role as a running back off the practice squad? I don't know. But these are tough decisions that are going to, the guys that were calling the game were talking during the game. Like, you could see a number of guys land on the roster and then the next day, be replaced by players that came through waivers. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
It's not a decision. I'm glad I don't have to make those decisions in terms of the personnel side, because it'd be very tough. And I think George Payton hit on it in the broadcast. He even said it, you have to make some really tough decisions because there's a lot of positions with a lot of good depth. And unfortunately, you can't carry everybody on. So thank goodness the practice squad is expanded. But Broncos country, thank you so much for tuning in to tonight's episode, Locked On Broncos, your post-game report immediately following the Broncos-Rams preseason action. The Broncos close out 3-0 in the preseason. Now they have a week off. Roster cuts are coming. Sayre and I, we're going to have you covered all week long as the Denver Broncos prepare for that Week 1 regular season opener, MetLife Stadium against the New York Giants, September 12th, 2:25 Mountain Time kickoff. We have you covered every single day, all year long. All the Broncos coverage that you need in one place. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'm Cody Roark, speaking for Sayre Bedinger. We'll see you next time for a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.